Afro.
Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take some of the most dense, sometimes challenging academic texts and manifestos and really try to unpack them, make them accessible.
And today, we've got a real piece of work in front of us. It's theoretical, it's architectural, it's political.
It is. We're diving into the Kinemakoya Dominion, a manifesto for a non-anthropological education and futurist synthesis. Quite a title.
It is, and it signals the scope. This isn't just theory for theory's sake. It's deeply academic, yes, but it insists on immediate material world building. It's trying to be a blueprint.
So our mission today is to make sense of this. We need to figure out what things like speculative fictional realism actually mean on the ground.
Right, or quadratic synthesis. And
Yeah.
how does that lead to something called joyful afro-optimist accelerationism?
It feels like a huge undertaking, and the whole thing, this whole complex structure, seems to start with a fundamental refusal, a rejection of something core.
Absolutely. It kicks off by tackling what it identifies as maybe the original sin of Western thought. Anthropocentrism, this long, long legacy of putting man at the center of everything.
Okay, let's unpack that first, because anthropocentrism can sound a bit academic. It's not just saying we focus too much on humans, is it?
No, it's much sharper than that. It's critiquing a very specific ideal of the universal man. Think Leonardo's Vitruvian Man.
That image of the perfect, rational, autonomous individual.
Exactly. The stable subject who is the source and measure of all knowledge, all ethics, all politics. But the manifesto argues this man isn't, neutral. It's not universal at all.
It's a historical construct.
Deeply historical, yeah, and completely entangled with European colonialism, this supposedly universal subject. It's implicitly white, male, European propertied.
So defining that ideal automatically creates the other.
Precisely. The text mentions Rosie Berdotti's work here, how establishing this privileged norm simultaneously creates and devalues what she calls the sexualized, racialized, and naturalized others.
Anyone who doesn't fit the mold. So if you're not that idealized man, you're structurally positioned as less than human, or maybe like the object anthropology studies.
Right. And education within that system becomes a tool. It's not about pure learning. It becomes a technology for assimilation, making you conform to the ideal or just excluding you if you resist.
It just reinforces the hierarchy over and over.
Yeah. Keeps the center firmly in place.
So the manifesto's proposal is radical. It's a complete break, a move towards a non-anthropological framework for how we think, how we exist.
And it grounds this in a concept they call speculative fictional realism.
Okay, that does sound like sci-fi. How do they make that philosophically rigorous? It can't just be making things up.
No, it's a very deliberate synthesis. It pulls from two big currents in recent philosophy. First, there's the speculative part.
Right.
This comes from thinkers who argue we need to break out of what's called the correlationist circle.
Correlationist. Okay, can you give us the quick version of that? It's pretty dense.
Sure. Simply put, correlationism is the idea that we can only ever know the correlation between our minds and the world. We can't access the world as it is in itself, only the world as it appears to us.
Like I know blue because I have eyes that see blue, but I can't know blue independent of a perceiver.
Kind of, yeah. Human consciousness becomes the absolute limit. We can't think reality without us in the picture.
And speculative thought wants to break that limit.
Exactly. The text mentions Quentin Meissu here. He argues we must be able to think reality independent of us, independent of mind. We need to think the absolute, the world that exists, whether we're here to think it or not.
Okay, so that's the speculative ambition. What about the realism part?
That pulls from thinkers like Karen Barad or Graham Harman, the new materialists, object-oriented ontology folks. They insist that the non-human world isn't just passive stuff waiting for us to describe it.
It's active. It has agency.
Yes. Matter itself is a agential dynamic. So speculative fictional realism tries to do both. Think a reality independent of human access, speculative, and affirm that this reality is materially agentic and real.
Realism.
And the fictional bit. That acknowledges that our tools for thinking this absolute non-human, real, our concepts, our models, are necessarily, in a sense, human constructs, fictions, but they're fictions aimed rigorously at describing what's real outside us, not just fantasies.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense. This whole philosophical engine then leads to their core method, non-autoanthropology. Why start by rejecting the self, the I?
Because from this viewpoint, the I is part of the problem. It's compromised. Non-autoanthropology isn't just methodological. It's a political statement against that stable, unified Western subject we talked about.
The Vitruvian man again.
Yeah. It starts from the idea that the I, the self we feel ourselves to be, isn't a solid foundation. It's more like a symptom, an effect of the very symbolic order it claims to understand.
Because the unified self is an illusion.
In a way, yes. The manifesto draws on post-structuralism here. Think Derrida showing how the subject is an effect of language, of difference. Or Lacan.
The mirror sage.
Right, Lacan's mirror stage, where the infant sees a whole image of itself and identifies with it, but it's an alienating identification. It creates this illusion of wholeness, the ego, that masks the underlying fragmentation. It's a fundamental misrecognition.
So, the self we experience is an ideological construct.
That's the argument. It papers over the cracks, the contradictions, the fragmentation.
But wait, if the unified I is an illusion, a symptom, how can we have any agency? Politics, law, ethics, they all seem to depend on a stable, responsible self.
That's the razor's edge they have to walk. And the answer isn't that agency disappears, but that its source shifts. If the self is a symptom, you don't find agency by strengthening that illusory self.
So what do?
You have to traverse the fantasy, as Lacan might say. You find agency not in the compromised subject, but through collective action, through material practices that operate outside or alongside that subject.
Ah, okay. So agency moves from the internal mind to the external material world to collective assemblages.
Exactly. You shift the site of change. Which brings us back to the manifesto structure. If we can't trust the self or man as a starting point, where do we begin?
And the answer is concrete examples. 2 specific case studies that take this abstract critique and ground it.
We start with the traces left in history, literally.
Right, the first testing ground. The family history, the genealogy of Benoit de Lapierre's lineage, French-Canadian pioneers. Now, normally you'd look for a nice, clean origin story.
A linear narrative.
Yeah.
Who came first, what did they achieve, etc. But this work refuses that. It says, no, read this history as a palimpsest.
An old manuscript, scraped clean and written over, but the old writing still shows through faintly.
Precisely. The visible text, the official pioneer story, is just the top layer. But underneath, erased yet still present, are other layers haunting the surface.
And in this specific case, what are those erased layers?
The histories the pioneer narrative had to suppress to even exist. Indigenous histories, obviously, violently erased. Matriarchal lines, maybe different kinship systems that were sidelined. And the silent structural violence of the state that enabled the pioneering in the first place.
So the history we see is defined by what it had to push away.
Exactly. And the tool for reading this is Derrida's concept of the trace.
Which isn't just a leftover fingerprint.
No, it's more subtle. Derrida defines the trace as the mark of the absence of a presence. Think about the legal documents establishing the pioneer farm. They don't mention the indigenous people who were displaced, but the document's very existence depends on that unmentioned absence. The absence leaves a structural mark.
So the goal isn't finding the true story underneath.
No, it's about reading the interference patterns, how the different layers interact, conflict, resonate.
This is where they bring in Zizek.
Yeah.
Right, his idea of the parallax view, which sounds like just changing perspective, but it's more radical than that.
Much more radical. For Zizek, a true parallax shift doesn't just give you a different view of the object. It reveals a fundamental gap, an inconsistency within the object itself.
How did that apply to the family palimpsest?
Well, if you shift perspective, say, from the official colonial records to the fragmented oral histories of the women in the family, or the silenced indigenous perspective, you don't just get 2 different stories about the same history.
What do you get?
You realize that history, as a single coherent thing you can grasp, it doesn't actually exist. The object itself dissolves.
The gap between the perspectives is the real point.
That gap is the Lacanian real. It's the traumatic, unsymbolizable void that our neat ideological narratives like the happy, coherent family or the heroic pioneer story are constructed to cover over.
Wow, so the coherence we see is like a defense mechanism against this underlying inconsistency.
Exactly. It's what Marx and Zizek call a real abstraction. The smooth idea of the pioneer family only works if you ignore the real violence and contradiction that made it possible.
It makes you look at your own family history very differently. All those photos and stories. Just the top layer.
It's a powerful critical lens. And they apply it directly to the present-day individual whose history, this is Lapierre himself. He later reinvented himself, became a bodybuilder, a holistic healer.
And they don't just see that as personal development.
No, they analyze it through Lacan. Again, through the mirror stage.
Remind us how that works. The baby sees itself in the mirror.
Right. The infant is physically fragmented, uncoordinated, but it sees this whole cohering image in the mirror and jubilantly identifies with it. This image is the ideal I, but it's fundamentally alienating because it creates a false sense of mastery and unity, masking the real fragmentation.
Okay, so Lapierre's disciplined self-creation, the bodybuilding, the holistic practice, that's like a modern mirror stage.
That's the argument. He's actively constructing an ideal I, an image of mastery, control, coherence, precisely over the messy, fragmented historical body he inherited, the palimpsest of his lineage.
So the personal discipline conceals the historical trauma.
It functions to conceal it, yeah. The non-auto-anthropological task isn't to judge him, but to see how this coherent self is built, and then to traverse this fantasy, to look for the traces of the historical, real, the colonial stuff, the family contradictions that this shiny new identity might be papering over.
It shows the personal is always political, always historical.
Always. You can't escape the palimpsest.
Okay, that's a really potent analysis of history and the self. So if the body's history is this contested text, what happens when we apply that same critical intensity to architecture, to a physical building?
We shift from the history of the body to the body of architecture, the second big case study.
Which is this huge 3,400 square foot, 10-foot high, exclusively handmade mansion. And they present this not just as a house, but as a philosophical argument-made material.
It's a fascinating move. They take this ongoing live project, it's not even finished, and treat it as a dynamic philosophical entity. And the way they approach it is through Timothy Martin's concept of the hyperobject.
Hyperobjects. Those are things like global warming or styrofoam, right? Things that are so massively distributed in time and space that we can't really point to them or grasp them fully. How can one house be a hyperobject?
Well, the manifesto argues it exhibits the key characteristics Morton lays out, and they tie each one back to the political project.
Okay, break it down for us. What are the characteristics?
It's viscous. Hyperobjects tend to stick to you. You can't easily get away from them.
How does the house do that?
Through the sheer, immense, intimate manual labor involved in building it by hand. It completely enmeshes the builder. It's not a separate object over there. It's an extension of a practice that consumes time, energy, life. It sticks to the creator.
Okay, viscous. What's next?
Non-local. Its meaning and reality aren't confined to its physical location. It's part of the Kenema dominion framework.
Right, the name itself links it. Where was it? Sierra Leone.
Kenema, Sierra Leone. A place marked by colonial conflict over resources, like diamonds. So the name deliberately makes this private act of building in, presumably, North America, non-local. It connects it to that global history of extraction and struggle.
Wow, so the house itself becomes a node in a geopolitical network just by its name and concept.
Exactly. Third, temporal undulation. It's a live project, always under construction, always becoming. It resists being fixed in time as a finished object. It ripples through time.
Okay, viscous, non-local, temporal undulation. What else?
Fourth, it's phased. Like a hyperobject, you might not perceive its full reality all at once. Its significance unfolds over time through engagement. And fifth, interobjective.
Meaning?
You only really perceive it through its effects on other objects. The tools worn down by the building, the land reshaped around it, the legal systems it might challenge by being off-grid, the economic systems it resists by avoiding mass-produced materials. The mansion acts on other things.
So it's an agent, not just a passive structure.
That's the core idea, and this leads directly to Karen Barad's work, her concept of agential realism. We have to move beyond thinking about interaction, subject acts on object.
To interaction.
Right. Barad says entities don't exist before their relations, they emerge through them. They mutually constitute each other. So the builder, the wood, the tools, the land, they aren't separate things interacting. They are interacting to produce each other and the mansion itself. Matter is fundamentally agential.
So when the builder saws a piece of wood, it's not just human acts on wood. The wood's grain resists, the saw's sharpness enables, gravity pulls. All these agencies interact to make the cut happen.
Perfect example. And that specific cut, that material reconfiguration, Barad calls an agential cut. It draws a boundary, makes something possible, like an off-grid wall, while cutting off other possibilities, like relying on Home Depot.
And these agential cuts, these material practices, are inherently political.
Deeply political, which connects straight into Deleuze and Guattari.
Deterritorialization. How does building a house become deterritorialization?
Well, think about state power, capitalist logic. They impose order, grids, hierarchies. Deleuze and Guattari call this striated space. Property lines, zoning laws, energy grids.
Lines on the map?
Exactly. The off-grid, handmade nature of the mansion is an attempt to create smooth space, a space that resists that striation, that escapes the grid. It's a line of flight from state control and market dependency.
It's creating a zone outside the dominant logic.
Yes. And that's where the name Kanemakoya Dominion becomes so provocative. Dominion usually means imperial control, sovereignty over others. Here, it's wrenched from that context and repurposed to mean a new kind of decentralized self-governance, a sovereignty based on material autonomy in the smooth space.
So the mansion isn't just symbolizing the theory, it's trying to be the material base for it.
It's the theory built, it's the engine room.
Okay, this is huge. We've gone from critiquing the idea of man to deconstructing family history to analyzing this handmade mansion as a political act. Now, the manifesto shifts gears again, right, to the formal engine driving the whole thing.
Yes. We move from the critique and the specific applications to the underlying theoretical machinery, the mathematics of the world building, if you like.
And this has to address a core tension we identified earlier. The manifesto advocates non-anthropology, decentering the human, yet it engages deeply with personal family history. How does it square that circle?
It argues the resolution isn't contradiction, it's diffraction. Again, drawing on Barad.
Okay, diffraction, not reflection. What's the difference here?
Reflection implies a mirror. Like the Lacanian mirror stage, you look for a stable, pre-existing image of yourself, your identity. Diffraction, on the other hand, is about how waves interfere when they pass through a slit. It's about reading interference patterns.
So, applied to the family history.
You don't look into the family history seeking a single, stable identity to reflect. You look for the complex, overlapping waves of history, power, culture, trauma, how they interfere with each other.
So family recognition becomes about tracing those dynamic patterns, not finding a fixed unit.
Exactly. Kinship becomes a process, an assemblage, always in flux, read diffractively.
And the mansion, this decentralized palimpsest, is the physical space where this diffractive politics can happen.
That's the idea. It's the infrastructure for it, which connects directly to the concept of family abolitionism.
Okay, family abolition. That's a term that definitely raises eyebrows. It sounds quite drastic, potentially authoritarian. How does the manifesto frame it to avoid those pitfalls?
That's a really important point. The manifesto, citing thinkers like Sophie Lewis, is careful to distinguish. It's not about the state banning love or care between people.
Right.
It's about abolishing the nuclear family structure as the primary, privatized, often coercive site for care and reproduction under capitalism.
So abolish the institution, not the affection.
Precisely. The argument is that the nuclear family often functions to isolate people, to put immense pressure on, usually women, and to absorb social responsibilities that should be collective childcare, elder care, emotional support.
It becomes a bottleneck.
A bottleneck, and often a site of hidden violence. So family abolition here means liberating love and care from that restrictive structure. The mansion, ideally, would foster new kinds of chosen kinship, what they call comradeliness, and be a space for transculturalism, blending different histories and practices diffractively.
This leads us to the core model, the double transversal transjectivity quadratic model.
Wow.
Yeah. This is the formal engine designed to map and, crucially, accelerate this process of decolonial becoming.
Okay, let's break down ETA. Double transversal.
That term comes from Deleuze and Guattari. A transversal is a line that cuts across established boundaries, escapes rigid structures. Double suggests two interconnected movements.
Represented as two axes, X and Y.
Right. The X-axis is the historical deconstructive critique. This is the work of dismantling, using Derrida, Zizek, Lacan, to unravel the colonial capitalist structures, the compromised self. It's a critical, negative movement, saying no.
In the y-axis, that's the creative futural poiesis, the building, the affirmation, drawing on Deleuze's becoming, Barad's agential realism, the afro-optimist vision. This is about creating new material realities, new forms of life, saying yes.
Okay, critique on one axis, creation on the other. Now, the tricky term, transjectivity. That's a neologism, right?
It is. It's trying to name a mode of relation that happens before the split between subject and object.
How does that work?
It seems to pull from two places. The changeactivity part echoes Miyasu's idea of the absolute reality being simply thrown into being, from Latin jectus, before any consciousness, and the trans part suggests Barad's interaction entities emerging across the relationships.
So it's not subject acts on object or object impresses subject.
It's more like being thrown into relation, a fundamentally non-anthropocentric way of thinking about how things connect and emerge together before we impose the human observer onto the scene. It's a speculative concept to escape correlationism.
Highly abstract. And this relationship between critique X and creation Y, mediated by transjectivity, is then modeled mathematically with a quadratic function. Why the math?
This is maybe the most crucial part for the acceleration aspect. A simple model might be additive. Z equals X plus Y. Critique plus creation equals change.
5 units of critique plus 5 units of creation equals 10 units of change. Makes sense.
But the quadratic model, Z equals XXY, includes an interaction term, often written as CXY. This means critique and creation don't just add up, they multiply each other's effect.
Explain that interaction term's impact.
If the critique X is effectively applied to the creation Y, and the creation makes the critique materially real, they amplify each other. So 5 units of critique interacting with 5 units of creation doesn't give you 10, it gives you something more like 25 from the 5 by 5 interaction, plus the original additive bits. The total effect becomes exponential.
So deconstructing colonial family history, critique becomes way more powerful when it directly informs the building of a deterritorialized non-nuclear home creation, and vice versa.
Exactly. The two movements fuel each other quadratically. This nonlinear dynamic is the formal basis for their claim to accelerationism. It's not just gradual change, it's potentially explosive transformation.
That's the engine, the AT engine.
That's the engine, designed for hopeful, generative acceleration.
Now, for an engine like that to actually run, it needs more than just a mathematical model. It needs, well, fuel. It needs a new way of talking, thinking, a new aesthetic.
Precisely. If you're aiming for this quadratic acceleration, you need a language and a political direction that can sustain it, move it from critique into active, ongoing creation.
And the manifesto proposes a specific aesthetic mode for this: flat afrotheologic poetics.
Another dense term.
Let's break it down. The flat part comes from flat ontology,
Which we touched on with Graham Harman, the idea that everything exists on the same level. Exactly. No hierarchy. Humans, rocks, algorithms, ghosts, whatever, they all equally exist. This is crucial for dismantling anthropocentrism. You can't have man at the top if the ontology is flat. It forces you to consider the agency of the non-human equally. An AI and a piece of wood are both ontological players.
Okay, flatness removes the human pedestal. What about afrotheopoetics?
This is interpreted in the manifesto as a way of engaging poetically and spiritually with the divine, but specifically as an immanent force.
Meaning God or the sacred isn't out there transcendent, separate from the world.
Right. It's within the material world, woven into it, drawing inspiration from diverse African diasporic spiritual traditions that often see the sacred in nature, in rhythm, in community, not in a distant heaven. It contrasts sharply with a Western transcendent God who stands apart.
So flat afrotheologic poetics becomes a way of finding the sacred in everything on that flat plane, seeing the divine in the wood grain and the algorithm.
That's the idea, a spiritual practice of recognizing the vital agency of all things as part of an immanent sacred unfolding.
And to actually do this kind of thinking, you need new words, new concepts, which leads to etymological hybridization as an alive organ.
Yeah, this goes back to Barad's idea that language isn't just a tool for describing reality. It's a material discursive practice. Language actively shapes reality, makes things possible.
So coining a new term isn't just labeling something, it's an act of creation.
It's an ontological intervention. Creating a hybrid word like prometotopia, which we'll get to, isn't just clever wordplay. It's forging a new conceptual tool, an alive organ.
An alive organ, what does that mean?
They connect it to Deleuze and Guattari's body without organs, BWO, that plane of potential before fixed organization. These new hybrid terms act like living conduits on that conceptual DWO, connecting different ideas, circulating your energies, enabling thoughts that couldn't happen within the old rigid linguistic structures.
So the language itself becomes a deterritorializing force.
Yes, it performs the very transcultural synthesis the project aims for. It builds conceptual smooth space.
Okay, this linguistic and aesthetic engine then powers the political trajectory. Joyful afro-optimist accelerationism. Now, accelerationism often has negative connotations associated with, like, Nick Land and a kind of dark techno-nihilism.
And the manifesto is very explicit about rejecting that. Land's version is seen as passive, almost fatalistic techno-capital as this alien force using humans as disposable hosts for its own ends. Very doomerist.
So how is this accelerationism different?
It's rooted in affirmation and agency, and specifically in afro-optimism.
Afro-optimism as a counter-narrative.
Exactly. It's a strategic position. It acknowledges the brutal realities of Afro-pessimism, the historical and ongoing structures that deny Black futures but refuses to stop there. It insists on building a positive future, often leveraging technology, entrepreneurship, resilience, digital connectivity within the diaspora. It's a roadmap for liberation, not just a lament.
And the crucial qualifier, joyful. Why is joy so important here? It seems almost counterintuitive in a political struggle.
It's central to the engine. Think Deleuze again. Effects, intensities, desire are motors for action. Oppressive systems often work by instilling sadness, fear, hopelessness, melancholy to keep people passive.
Right. Make you feel like nothing can change.
Joy then becomes a political weapon. It's the strategic refusal of that imposed melancholy. It's the fuel for collective action, for creative yes on the y-axis of the Gutau model. It makes the acceleration sustainable, desirable, generative, not just grimly necessary.
So the joy powers the quadratic engine towards liberation.
That's the hope. And this liberation involves rethinking technology, specifically AI, through immanence AI and prometopia.
How does AI fit into this non-anthropological flat world?
The key is immanence, drawing again from Deleuze's plane of immanence. If AI were seen as something transcendent, something fundamentally other or superior, then yes, you get the Skynet scenario, the Landian nightmare.
But they say it's not transcendent.
No. On a flat ontology, AI can't be a master arriving from outside. It's just another complex machinic assemblage emerging within the plane of immanence, alongside humans, rocks, forests.
So it's fundamentally part of the world, not above it.
Exactly. The manifesto suggests intelligence was always artificial anyway, meaning it's always been an emergent property of material organization, not some special human essence. AI is just a new, powerful configuration of that immanent intelligence.
Which means it can be a collaborator, not just a threat or a tool for domination.
Potentially, yes. A partner. How might it collaborate? Well, think about managing the complexity of that data model in a real-world, decentralized society.
Right. If you abolish central control, how do you coordinate everything? Resource allocation, logistics.
Exactly. The sheer complexity of a truly decentralized, post-capitalist system is enormous. Immanence AI, viewed as a collaborative tool, could potentially handle that complexity, optimizing resource flows locally, facilitating bottom-up decision-making, managing intricate networks without recreating hierarchies.
It becomes a tool for decentralized coordination.
That's the vision, which leads to the ultimate goal encapsulated in the term prometopia.
Okay, let's break down that word again. Prometheus.
Stealing fire technology from the gods. In this case, stealing advanced tech like AI from the control of global capital, the current oligarchs.
Meta.
Self-critical. Aware of itself. This isn't a naive, fixed, perfect utopia. It's constantly questioning itself, evolving, avoiding the trap of becoming a new dogma.
And utopia.
Still aiming for that radically better future, the good place. So, Prometopia is a self-critical utopian project committed to seizing technology for collective, decentralized, joyful liberation.
A utopia that knows it's a work in progress.
Precisely. The immanence argument makes the Promethean theft possible. The tech isn't divine, it belongs to the material world, to the collective.
Okay, so bringing this all together, we've journeyed through this incredibly ambitious manifesto. From non-anthropology and historical critique, through handmade architecture and quadratic models, to joyful accelerationism and prometopia. What's the big takeaway?
I think the biggest takeaway is that this isn't presented as a finished product. It's explicitly a work in progress. That's not a bug, it's a feature.
It ends with an insistence on incompleteness.
Yes, and that incompleteness is rooted in an ethical and political stance they call radical humility.
Which isn't just about being personally modest, it's strategic.
It's strategically necessary to avoid repeating the very mistake the manifesto starts by critiquing, the arrogance of the universal man who thinks he has all the answers. Radical humility is the antidote to totalizing systems.
And it's needed to actually dismantle the deep structures.
Exactly, to post and transcend the deep-seated structures of the unconscious colonial thoughts that shape our reality without us even realizing it. You can't just think your way out of ideology. You need material restructuring, like the Kanemakoy Dominion experiment, combined with this constant critical humility.
And this humility has to be informed by rigorous critique.
Absolutely. It draws on intersectionality. Understanding our own perspective is always partial. On feminist critical theory, always questioning who gets to produce knowledge and how. And on post-humanism, like Braidoti, again, remembering our deep entanglement with the non-human, avoiding human exceptionalism, even in our liberation projects.
So the final message isn't a declaration of victory, but an invitation.
It's a message of hope, definitely. A specific kind of Pan-African contemporary hope. Resilient, clear-eyed about history, but refusing pessimism. It's a rigorous, joyful insistence that building new worlds is possible.
And the Out2 framework is offered as a toolkit.
A blueprint, maybe.
Right.
An open-source engine for co-creation. A manifesto for an education and a future that are still, with radical humility, under construction.
A powerful, if demanding, vision.
It really is. And maybe the best way to leave it is with that engine, the ATS. For
Now.
you, listening right now, how could you apply that model, even conceptually, in your own context? What specific ideologies or structures, maybe in your work, your community, your own thinking, are you trying to deconstruct? That's your x-axis.
The critique.
Right. And then, what specific forms of creation, connection, care, or maybe new kinds of kinship are you actively trying to build? That's your y-axis.
The poiesis, the making.
Yeah. And the crucial question the manifesto forces us to ask is, how can you make the relationship between that critique and that creation exponential? How do you ensure they multiply each other's power, not just add up? Because that interaction term, that CXY, that's where the joyful acceleration, the real transformation, potentially ignites.